everybody, this is Heather Leah, WRAL's Hidden Historian, and I'm out here today on a Greenway trail surrounded by these really beautiful and thick woods, and there happens to be a life-sized dinosaur in these woods. Some of you may recognize the dinosaur. His name is Bronto, and he has been in the area since the 1960s. I know I saw him as a child, but a lot of people really didn't know what happened to him after the exhibit that Bronto was part of was taken apart, dismantled. But it turns out that this 30-foot huge dinosaur is just sitting out here in the woods. So let me turn this around and go ahead and show you. And we'll start by taking a look at him. And we'll get closer, don't worry, but I wanted to start and let you guys see how he looks as you're walking up on him. I mean, if you didn't know there was going to be a dinosaur out in the woods, that would be pretty shocking to walk up to and just suddenly see this giant creature poking its head out of the leaves, out of the trees. And the woods out here are pretty thick, you know, a lot of growth on the trees, ivy and plants hanging down. So it really has a very nice wild look out here as well, though we are on a Greenway trail. So we're going to get a little bit of a closer look, and then we're going to talk about the history of why this dinosaur is out here. Some of you may already know why the dinosaur is out here. Now, I will say, I did not realize that he was still out here. This is in Durham, Carla. We are very close to his original exhibit. So I remember when I was a kid, back in the 1990s, aging myself, he did lose his head a while back, but it's here again. When I was a kid, and probably many of you who are local remember, going to see at the Museum of Life and Science in Durham, they had a trail, and this was long before we had these big Dino Quest adventures coming to Raleigh. This was a huge deal because you could walk on this trail and see out in the woods these huge dinosaurs that were like essentially life-size dinosaurs in the distance. Yes, this is the Science Museum, and I remember as a kid, I don't think you were able to get very close to him. He was way, way back in the woods, but you could just see him because he's so big out in the distance. Let's take a little close-up of his head. Now, he's gone through a lot. Apparently, he's been in the area since the 1960s. So even longer. Again, I remember this exhibit in the 90s, but apparently this exhibit had been around even longer. Some of you may even remember, now this is not the same dinosaur, but you may remember when the Sinclair dinosaurs came to North Hills, which I believe that was in the 1960s as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. It might have been the 70s, but there was basically a time where these life-size dinosaurs really first gained a lot of traction and popularity, and I'm thinking he's from that era. Yeah, so he was part of this trail, and there were other dinosaurs out here. I actually am not sure what happened to all his dinosaur buddies. Look at how huge he is, because when you were a kid, again, if I remember correctly from when I was a kid, you couldn't get close. Not nearly as close as today. So you're able to see a much closer view. So this guy, if he was around in the 1960s, we're talking like this guy is, I mean, he's pretty old. He's decades old. And today he's just out here in the woods. Now, I don't believe that this land is considered part of the museum anymore. We are close to the museum. So if you want to visit him, and you get this really cool close-up look of him, he's actually at Northgate Park, and there's a trail, a Greenway trail that you can take and just walk down, and you'll see him poking his head, you know, 30 feet in the air, or maybe more like 20 feet in the air, really high up in the air, poking his head through the trees and looking at you. And you can see the trees really are quite covered with greenery, and so you would really be surprised to see this face just kind of poking through at you. Now, I do remember going to see the exhibit that he was part of back in the 90s when I was a kid, and again, you couldn't get this close. Yeah, I'd love to hear some of you who remember him from even before the 90s. So it sounds like, Angela, you remember seeing him in the 70s. Angela, if you remember, were you able to get close to him, or was he still kind of far in the distance like he was when I was a kid in the 90s? I remember him being kind of far away. You didn't get to see him very close up. I mean, you can really see all the detail work on him when you're this close. Now, I do know that he's been through a lot. So I do remember when Hurricane Fran came through. Anyone who was here for that, I'm sure you remember that experience. It changed a lot of things. It certainly changed the way I thought about hurricanes and if they were able to reach me in Raleigh. And I believe that caused a lot of damage on, oh, you could touch him. Angela, I don't think it was that way when in the 90s. So maybe things changed a bit since the 70s. That's really cool. So this is the closest I've ever been to him. But anyways, the Hurricane Fran came through, and Hurricane Fran really knocked down a ton of trees and had a lot of destruction. And I believe that's what happened to that dinosaur exhibit, is there was just a lot of damage and the trail was closed down. And as far as I recall, I don't even know if they ever opened it again. But I do know that that was sort of at least the beginning of the end for the exhibit that had these dinosaurs. And after that, I do remember a story about some vandals coming and stealing his head. In fact, I think WRAL has that story. I'm going to be writing a story on the history of the dinosaur. Should be coming out tomorrow. So I'll link that in that story if you want to see these kind of older history stories about this dinosaur. But I remember people came and stole his head, and there was a picture. It was very eerie of him without his head, with just like a metal bar sticking out where his neck is. So he's been through a lot. And if any of you remember, there are giant creatures similar to him around the triangle, right? There's the Zebulon. Well, now it's called the Zebulon cougar. I guess it was the Leith cougar back in its era, but a giant cougar that used to overlook the Capitol Boulevard area where that is today. And then there was also the Raleigh giant. And both of them have been through their own, experiences with being damaged by storms. So these really giant icons of the triangle often have these legends that kind of go behind him. I would have to wonder if this guy comes alive at night and wanders through the woods. He looks very lifelike here in his eye. Look at him. He's got a little twinkle in his eye. So anyways, he's been through quite a lot, but you can still visit him. He's out here in the woods. Like I said, this is now part of, looks like we're on a Greenway, and I believe the Greenway connects to Northgate Park. We're also very close to the museum, which is just down there. I believe, and again, the article will go into more of this. I'm just visiting him today for pictures and going live while I'm here. But I believe he's no longer part of the museum's land, but he's just still out here. And they didn't get rid of him, which is great. So now there's a dinosaur in the woods of Durham. All right, everyone. So thank you for joining me today for this little fun piece of hidden history, something lighthearted and fun hiding in Durham. Honestly, it was pretty cool to walk around the corner here of the Greenway and just see him, this immense dinosaur peeking out, even though I knew that he was going to be here. If you're wanting to visit him yourself, he is very close to the Museum of Life and Science in Durham. He's sort of between the museum and Northgate Park. There's a Greenway, and a sign was on the Greenway that said the Bronto Trail, and his name is Bronto. So that's sort of how I found him. I did have to look around a little bit for him. So if you're looking for him, he's not hard to find, but I definitely had to look around a little bit. When my story comes out tomorrow, I will try to provide directions to help you find him if you want to come out on one of these really pretty spring days. Take your kids, take a look at him, go to the museum, go to the park, and just kind of, have a fun outing and see this piece of history. Because again, he's been around this area since the 60s, which I didn't even realize they were that old. I thought they were from the 90s. So thanks for joining me today for more hidden history, and be sure to look for the story tomorrow, and I'll see you next time for more. Thanks, everyone. Bye.